embracing and stridently following nebulous and insidious social movements like wokeism, for instance, requires those who are generally masterful maniacal manipulators, master class manipulators who have influenced and perpetuated wokeism need to be exposed and stopped. This book aims to deliver a society wide wake up call. As you read, you'll see and emerge a clear pattern of masterful manipulators. Those manipulators are expert at using false narratives to motivate actions. For example, Darwin used false scientific narratives to motivate others to embrace a new way of viewing creation and the human condition. His theories enabled Marx and other megalomaniacs figures to deploy scientific justifications as means to begin permanently changing the order of things within civil societies. Following masterful manipulators and embracing their schemes have led to boundless mass horrors and atrocities. Motivated minions carrying forward Darwin and Marx's racism, supremacy, eugenics, atheism, and sexism are not driven by principles of truth and love. They, unfortunately, blinded by the zeal of disgusting false narratives. This book strives to eradicate this affliction. Make no mistake, while wokesters are the revolutionaries for afflicting culture with false narratives, most of them can be awakened with truth. It's high time for mass awakening. Master manipulators have been celebrated and esteemed by the historical facts, but the historical facts reveal the truth that drives away the darkness while awakening hearts and minds. In the battle to combat racism, supremacy, and the myriad of cultural ills, wokesters must be awakened, and the time is now.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, where are you going with this?
Where I'm going is I'm pointing to a time that we're in right now, actually. If you're honest with yourself, you understand that we have collusions between our government, collusions between our government offices, collusions between our government offices and the media, collusions between the media and academia, collusions between academia and school boards, collusions between, just all these different forces that are trying to promote these and perpetuate false narratives, right? The false narrative of white supremacy and racism as only coming from one particular type of dissenting voice. If you happen to be a dissenting voice and you're not on with wokeism, guess what? You're white supremacist and you're a racist. If you want to really fully embrace American history, guess what? You're white supremacist and you're racist. Even today, they say that they're going to, stop selling gas stoves. And if you don't want them to stop selling gas stoves, guess what? You're a white supremacist and racist. Yeah, I mean, come on. But what we used to have were sort of these checks and balances with media, not taking a side, but with media simply reporting and sort of being that third rail for us so we can actually weigh truth from false. And now we have this whole thing is one big mess of propaganda and brainwashing and all of this. Now, a lot of people won't really recognize when, where, and how this came about. But actually in 2012, there was a bill passed. I think it was HR 1357. And that was Barack Obama's plan that government can and should propagandize, knowingly telling untruths to the American people, and pass legislation. Of course, it went through the House, and we had a number of people on both sides supporting that, but it was his administration that put that forth. And since that time, we have been horribly manipulated as a society. They manipulated us with the vaccines. They manipulated us with the actual COVID-19. They manipulated us with, and they continue, okay, with all these other things. So that's the point, is I'm trying to help people to understand that, look, we are not being served well by not critically thinking ourselves through some of these issues. And if we were to just put on our thinking caps, like our school teachers used to tell us, we can probably come up with better conclusions than the ones that they're trying to have us embrace.
Okay. So how do I identify a maniacal manipulator? Go ahead, Lonnie, and then anyone can field that question.
I was just going to point out, in addition to what Kevin shared, that I was watching on one of the network channels. There's so many now, I don't even remember the name of it. And there's a show, it's like a documentary. It's called The America in Color, and it's about old black and white footage that's been colorized, with the modern technology, so that you can see the imagery in color as opposed to black and white. And what I learned was, in addition to Japanese Americans that were interred during World War II, that also Italian Americans and also German Americans were interred during World War I. Something that I was not even aware of, but which you typically hear about is Japanese Americans, but also was interred. So, as Kevin pointed out, full history. When you want to tell history, you want to tell the full history. Otherwise, you're one of these manipulators, as Kevin has pointed out, that has an agenda. I just found that interesting. I just wanted to dovetail into what Kevin was saying.
And let me dovetail on what you're saying. We're even finding now that there are versions of the Bible that are slowly being altered.
Yes.
Especially the LGBTQ community has begun to alter the Bible. And myself, as I've been encouraged by my apostle to really learn the Hebrew, right? So that I could read the Bible in its format and not be in its original language, right? Is going to be helpful, because I don't think that we really understand that the manipulation is not just stopping with current affairs. Right. So school books, right? Remember, we were hearing about history, how slaves were not slaves. They were like volunteers, right? Unpaid labor. I remember hearing about that. Like, really, that's what we're teaching the kids now, is that it wasn't really about slavery. They were like volunteers or just unpaid labor. And so it becomes this thing on, how do we even preserve the truth?
Right.
How do we preserve the truth, and who will be around long enough to make sure that the truth is preserved?
Right.
It's like we either have to have our own websites, have our own libraries, without, I guess one could say, without God, without this Holy Spirit. I mean, how can you discern? And still there are areas where we are blindsided, or just not our strong points. Like,
right.
I don't know anything about science, so if they start, changing chemical makeups or saying, oh, this is okay or that's okay, I mean, I don't really know.
Right.
So where do we go? Who do we turn to? Who becomes the people that can help us?
Right.
What are your thoughts? Neil, are you on now? You said you should be on.
Off mute.
Take yourself off mute.
Okay, I guess Neil is not with us yet, even though he sent me a text saying that he should be on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, here, is that working?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah, the window I have does not show me where the mute button is or anything, so I was hoping you would take me off.
I cannot.
Oh, okay. I found it, yes. Well, one thing I can tell you, you asked about when they start changing things. The beauty about the system is that we have so many scientists in the Christian community. And so my worry is not that we won't be able to detect it. The worry really is, because, they'll say, yeah, no, this is wrong, this is nonsense, is will they be able to reach the general public with that information? Because, so far we were short-sighted with Twitter and Facebook and all those things. So we really need to create the alternative economy of contact. So we need to be able to gather the faithful in an alternative way. So not on a Facebook, not on a Twitter, because even Twitter, though, it's kind of writing itself right now. We're still dependent on somebody else's ability to send us information or to share our information. So we really need to create an alternative economy of news, an alternative economy of Facebook. And many people say, well, there's Gab, there's all these things. The problem with that is not enough of our side have moved over to that. I'm on Gab, I'm on MeWe, and a bunch of other things, but there's barely 100,000 people on there. I really need to get the millions of Christians over into that, and that's really what our battle is. Our battle is often not about the enemy. The battle is amongst ourselves and gathering the truth together, sadly.
Do you have any suggestions, Neil?
Well, yes, I do, but I don't think it's practical. You need to get a big voice, a loud voice. You need to get the big Christian leaders. You need to get, someone with a pulpit like Trump, and you need to get all these guys to get together and say, look, we're going to create something, or we're going to take something that is created, and we're going to recommend everybody who hears this message, go over there. And then once you get that going, because if I say it, nobody's going to listen to me. If, you've got to get somebody who has got the who's got the pulpit, who's got the bully pulpit, if you will, that can actually get the message across. And so that's the only way to do it. Right now, we've not been able to do it. Trump isn't, he could have done it, but I don't know why nobody advised him to do it. He talked about the truth, what's it called? The one that my pillow guy has, but
Truth Social.
Truth Social. But again, a lot of people, I'm on there, but a lot of people are not on there. So you've got to you really have to focus and gather. I think that's beyond the scope of this talk, but it's just something to keep in mind.
I would add that we even need to create institutions of higher learning, because the ones that were originally founded, and most colleges and universities were founded by denominations, by Christian denominations. They've been commandeered by those with a different worldview, and because they're on the boards and they appoint the presidents and so forth and hire the educators. We must have looked to organizations, educational organizations that have our worldview, and if they're not there, then create those. It's a Herculean task, but it needs to be done.
What about the network of homeschools? I mean, homeschooling has greatly increased, but is it a significant enough network? I know they network with each other, and I know that there are varying faiths, and there are people who are not even Christians who are homeschooling. But that idea of teaching young people, I mean, when you read the Tanakh, the Old Testament, when you look at what our Creator said on how not just to multiply, right, and subdue the earth. The point is that we were to teach our children. And as you teach your children, as you walk along the way, as you sit in your house, right, you have many of these instructions by him on this is how you maintain a society that is God-fearing, is that you teach your children. And so you will find in certain cultures, they do teach their children about their faith, you know, and the children are learning the Torah, the Old Testament, from 5 and 6 years old. They're beginning to memorize it so that they can quote it.
Wow.
And you cannot deny the fact that that culture and community is very strong.
Right.
They hold a large amount of wealth within the world. I'm talking about the Jewish community. Right. And they teach their children, not only do they go to school, but they have a midrash where they actually go to a separate school where they learn to speak Hebrew, where they learn to memorize the Torah, the Tanakh. I mean, memorize it. And they can quote it backwards by the time they're in what we would call middle school.
Wow.
So they are religious, if you will, about teaching children about the faith. I think some of other cultures have gotten lackadaisical that way. And I think that, you know, teaching at home, I mean, if our creator set it up that we should be the first teachers for our children and that we should always be talking about our faith, always been teaching them the 10 Commandments. But, you know, we have allowed our communities and our culture and television and, you know, YouTube to now babysit the children, take care of them, teach them, send them off to school, after school programs. It's a rarity that happens unless you have a different kind of social economic status where you can afford to have a parent at home who is making sure that those things are being taught.
That's right.
But I know we're talking about manipulators and politics and what's going on, but if we are to reverse that, I think we're going to have to start at home.
So there's actually a move to do that. It's called Revive Academies, and will be probably coming out this summer. And the idea here is to allow parents to pull their kids, parents who where both parents work, to pull their kids out of public schools and send them to a church school. And the idea is based on, I mean, it will cost about $2,000 a year, $2,000 to $3,000 a year.
It's good
for the tuition. So it's not free, but maybe scholarships would cover that.
Yeah.
But what the idea there is that you have these churches that have rooms, and this Revive Academies will create a structure where the parents can connect with independent teachers who are vendors. So think of it as the Uber of schools. And they will organize the church, they will organize a room, they will organize teachers, and the parents drop the kids off at 8 a.m. and they pick them up at 5 p.m. There'll be an after-school program as well. And the churches don't have employees. The teachers are just 1099 employees, no W-2s. OSHA doesn't get involved, nothing like that. It's a huge program, and the idea is to pull out at least 2 to 20 million kids from public schools.
Wow. Is there a website? Or...
Not yet, but we will definitely let people know, yeah.
That will be that will go a long way to helping to ease the level of manipulation. Here's the problem that about masterful manipulators. When they work through our school, our primary foundations of public schools and that, there are a certain segment of individuals, mostly, you know, poor or working class individuals, which happens to be mostly ethnic minorities, that are then the primary recipients of the brainwashing, right? So there needs to be school choice and alternative platforms, like what you're talking about, Neil. This sounds wonderful, fantastic. Because, and even at $3,000 a year, you're only talking about what, $150 a month, or, you know, $200 a month, a little bit over $200 a month. So the reality is parents can probably come up with that. I mean, work that in the budget and come up with that. It's better than 18,000 or 20,000 or 25,000 that some of us have taken our kids to you know, and private schools throughout, and that's pretty much what it is. So this is fantastic, and it will help break the cycle of propagandizing, brainwashing, and manipulating. The number one thing today for children, I just saw the statistic last week. They said the number one issue for kids because of brainwashing is that they think global warming is going to wipe out the whole world. Global warming, you know, climate change. They don't learn about nuclear war. They have no concern about the guy in the White House calling and saying, look, you know, we're on the brink of Armageddon. This is what he said multiple times in the past couple of months. So there's no concern about nuclear war or any of the wars that are going on, anything else. Their concern is climate change. So that shows you the level of deception and manipulation. And that, I think it was over 60% of all children. I think it was a global study. So we need to break that.
Amen.
A church I attended in South Orange County, California. It was a small church, and they had available real estate within the church for classrooms, and they started a school there. It's called St. Michael's Academy. What was interesting, and this was about 15, 17 years ago, what was interesting is that the school garnered such a great reputation that it drew parents that weren't even necessarily even Christian. They were from various backgrounds, but they recognized the value of what the type of children, or as my dad would say, the product that came out of the school was exemplary because they taught morality and some basic tenets of how to live constructively. And the backside of this is from those children going there, and some of these children were Muslim, some were conventionally Jewish, if you were, and is the children end up ministering to the parents, and the parents became Christian in their worldview. It was a really interesting thing to see.
Yeah.
So this is some of the benefits that comes from doing the types of things that and Neil was speaking of and Kevin were speaking of, and it's absolutely where we need to go as a nation. I've always believed that it starts with the pastors and in the churches. And, you know, most churches today have issues with congregation size, except for the mega churches. And how do they solve that problem? I've always thought that if you started some type of school within your church, the byproduct would be you would garner future members of your congregation, because the children would grow up and want to go to church there. And certainly, as I mentioned before, the children reached out to their parents who might not even have been Christian, but became Christian because their children were doing so well within that school system.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, this is a good start.
Yep.
I mean, education, the home. But again, as Neil was saying, we've got to get the word out that these are options to consider and that it's important. And how do we still have to educate the adults, because they are the ones that control the children, right? And so if you cannot educate and support the adults in knowing about and then realizing the benefit of, making this choice on how you educate your child, the good things are not going to get the type of traffic. Now, seeing the way that it's structured, whether it's, one child or 10 children, it seems like that the structure of Revive can still flourish. It's not going to have all of that overhead that would require, we need 100 students enrolled, or else we can't make payroll, we can't pay the lights, we can't pay all those things. And I'm sure that Revive has already thought of those things, but it does then come down to still needing to educate the adults.
Yeah.
Yes, Neil.
Yeah, no, I was agreeing. Yeah, they have thought about that. There's a bunch of because again, it's on demand thing. So they don't own any facilities. They don't, they don't have any employees. So if there's students, then there's teachers, and the teachers contract directly with the parents. So every teacher is an independent contractor. So again, all Revive is doing is enabling this. As I said, it's the Uber, right? So if there's no passengers, there's no drivers. If there's no drivers, then the passengers can't get a thing. So it's just the way it works.
Yep.
Well, I hope that our economy of scale can grow, and it's not, I think, we are very much concerned about the country that we live in, but the United States is a drop in the bucket, to the rest of the world,
yeah.
Right, as far as population. And we should, yes, be concerned about our own home and our children, but I also think about how do we support this type of work. And I think that in other communities, I wish that Major Daughter's not able to talk. She's in South Africa. To get some foreign opinions on what is their education system that's happening. I mean, we can tell from research that the morality scale of the United States is, probably the lowest of most nations as far as, thinking about homosexuality, thinking about marriage between a man and a woman, thinking about people being married and not just living together, right? So there are other nations and other cultures who we would say are more conservative, right? But they're still, within those cultures, their government still plays a very large role in
dictating what they believe as a nation.
Right. So those are things that still have to be taken in effect. Not that we have to take that up, but I think it's important for us to remember that. And, it's not that we want to create more missionaries to go out and do that. We just have to, there's a way to think about how do we connect our world globally? And is it that if we can get ourselves to a place that we can see these changes in our culture, would that be enough to influence the world globally? But still, I mean, we have tried with wars to go in and liberate nations, to free people from the tyranny of their own governments. And that has not always worked out well for us. Has not always worked out well for those communities as well. And it has, at times given us the appearance that we are bullies as a nation, that we are manipulators. And so there's this balance that, we have to think about how we move, as a nation. But at least at this point, we're looking at our own homes and our own communities saying, we realize that there needs to be a change. And what can we do about changing that?
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump back into the book unless anyone else has something they want to offer. Okay. Wokesters are being heavily marketed to and encouraged to embrace self-deception. Even in serious, quote, scientific and, quote, scholarly works, wokesters demand people reject logic, reason, prudence, and even mathematics and science in order to advance their transformative mission. Wokesters are driven to willingly allow themselves to be emotionally manipulated to the extent that both the racist science of Darwin and Marx's abusive political philosophies energize the push towards a one-world government utopia. If someone asks, what does a wokester embrace of Darwin's racist supremacist science and of Marxist political philosophies look like in today's world? The answer is everywhere in divisive, hate, and resentment-filled, anti-logical, socially destructive, and infanticidal rhetoric, receiving praise in academia, politics, and the media. Okay, Kevin, that's like a whole bunch of adjectives. Tell me what you're talking about, please.
Okay, so let's give a for instance. Let's do a quick one. If I were to drive my car and hit a lady in front of me who happens to be pregnant, she loses the baby and loses her life. Guess who goes to jail? However, in the same context, people would applaud that woman if she were going to an abortion clinic and killing the baby, even late term. So there, you have to sort of put aside logic, prudence, wisdom, understanding, and embrace this sort of arcane, hypocritical, thing, and say, oh, this is actually a good thing. If I were to say there are just two biological species of human beings, science has proven it over millennia, that should be understandable. But you say that today, that'll get you kicked out of your college if you're a college professor, or get you kicked out of your workplace if you're an employee. That will get you kicked out of politics if you're a politician. This is not, this is not debatable. This is a reality. But what they're asking us to do is to reject reality, logic, prudence, wisdom, and all the things that brought us to this point as civilizations. Put all that aside and to embrace a woke notion of gender fluidity. There are no such things as biological sex anymore. There's no such thing as a baby in the womb, because it's just tissue, until you have an accident and you kill the mother and the baby. Then it was a baby. So these are the types of things that we gotta our head would explode if we tried to really think logically about it and understand what's going on. So this is what I'm pointing to. There's a manipulation via culture that has this whole moniker of wokeism tied to it, that wants us to just orient ourselves emotionally towards the wokeism, which would then supersede rationality, logic, prudence, wisdom, and everything else. And it's just the emotionalism of the moment that takes precedence. Does that make it any easier? Did that make sense?
Yes, it did. Thank you. Because there was a lot of adjectives in there, and I'm like, well, what are you trying to say? And I think that was an excellent way that you phrased it about, the accident and with the car, and that you would be convicted of murder. But yet, if the woman makes a choice to go to a clinic, it's not considered murder at all. And then we see that what has been, called racism or prejudiced, because you make a decision about someone based on their skin color. But then now we want to make rules and allowances for people based on their skin color.
Yeah, good one.
So which one is it?
Right. Right.
Is it racism, or is it like justification? Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, sorry, I was just coughing. I didn't mean to interrupt. But yeah, well, let me, since I have the floor, let me add, and this is something I tell everyone, as Lonnie says, of the darker paint job. Understand this very clearly, folks. If we allow people to be discriminated based on skin color, like we allow white people to be discriminated on skin color. You know the tables are going to be turned, you know the tide is going to be turned, you know the culture is going to be turned, and one day they will discriminate us on skin color, and we have a few hundred years of that experience. Do you really want to open that door up again? This is the most dangerous thing you could ever allow, to allow anybody to discriminate anybody against skin color, because let me remind you, we are still the minority, and when things get ugly, we will still be the minority.
Yeah.
And they've made sure of that with all these abortion clinics, right?
Amen. Amen.
You know, if there was ever a chance that as a unit or a group we might come together, that is a long way off of being returned now with the amount of Black lives that have been killed in the womb.
Yep.
Exactly. And you could argue that this is just a way. Imagine that you were a white supremacist and you really hated Black people or brown people. What better way to bring back discrimination than to allow it through this little hole, right? Oh, we're going to discriminate against white people. Oh, well, now we're going to discriminate against brown people. Oh, well, now we're going to discriminate against Black people. You've just changed everything that Martin Luther King ever fought for, and you've just undone it. And that's the way a white supremacist would think. How do we undo what Martin Luther King did? This is the way to do it. You first turn it the way they think it's going to go, and then one day, boom, it changes overnight.
Yeah.
On point, Neil. On point. And it goes against common sense, I would say, when I'm arguing, if you will, with wokesters and they don't understand that we don't have the numbers, and because of abortion, our numbers have been impacted significantly over the last 70 plus years. So if the tables were to turn, because they're saying, that I'll be ready to defend myself, I said, well, if you don't have the numbers, it doesn't make sense, because that other side, with the lighter paint job, who might not like you because of the color of your skin, they're armed too.
Well, worse than that, look who they're disarming. They're not disarming the white folks, they're disarming all the Black folks.
Exactly.
Right? So they're making sure that the Black folks will not be able to defend themselves. I mean, yeah, we've got illegal guns in the streets, but these are not the kind of guns that are going to help you. They're handguns and things like that, right? If there does come to be something horrible, the minorities are minorities, exactly.
Sense of well, we've got guns. I says, well, handguns and Saturday night specials and what have you does not even begin to compute with the number of real weaponry that other parts of America have, and folks have, and it just goes against common sense. We've made such tremendous gains as a people in this nation. In fact, we had a president that was elected not once but twice, who happens to have the darker paint job. But it's, there are those who say this is all by design to drive us towards civil war. And I think common sense should prevail, especially for those of us who do have the darker paint job.
Amen. Regina, I'm going to drop off in a few minutes, so I just want to let you know.
Yes, I saw that text. Thank you. Are there any last parting thoughts that you want to give about anything that we're discussing?
No, I think you guys have covered it really well.
Okay. So let's get back then.
Regina, can I point something out here that hit me? This is all designed to do one thing, and it's designed to silence the church, the true church, and drive the church underground. So we end up in a situation where we're much like China, where China has the church there, but the true church is a political entity governed by the Chinese government. The true church in China is driven underground. And so it does not have the power that we as the church here in America have had and allowed us to grow and become the greatest nation in the history of the world. So you make no bones about it, folks. This is to silence us and drive us underground where we don't have the impact that we were so graciously given because of the understanding the founding fathers had of what gives true power. And as I pointed out in previous broadcasts that we've done, that when we were fighting for independence from Great Britain, the British Army, and military, which was the most powerful in the world, in the history of the world at the time, much like America is today, they were more afraid of the clergy within America than they were the military, because they knew the clergy would stir up the people to stand up and push back and join the military, which was ragtag if you read his history books, and push back, and we had the result we have, and we have America today.
Yeah. It's good.
And, something that Neil was saying is that the moment you accept any kind of discrimination, know that it's coming for you, right? And so I think that's the same thing with the church, and we are beginning to see some of it. The Christians in America aren't really persecuted per se, as one might understand persecution worldwide of Christians, right?
Right.
Being killed, having your land taken, having your home burned. I lived in a country for 5 years in Vietnam where the persecution of Christians, especially of the native and tribal people who became Christians, that persecution was high. And
wow.
I was able to connect with Christians in Pakistan and India and other places where there's real persecution of Christians. But let's not make a mistake and think that Christianity will not be on the chopping block for discrimination.
Oh yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah.
I mean, we might say that the whole LGBTQ agenda was one that flies in the face of Christianity, but I'm almost more inclined to say that it really flies in the face of women, right? With Kevin's war on women. And so if you can fly in the face of women, I think you are still coming at the heart of God, right? Because she was the last thing that he made. And it was always, we need her.
Yeah.
I mean, humanity needs woman. And so evil in the garden didn't come after man. There could have been some other ways to come at him, to knock him down, to do whatever. But somehow evil came after woman. And one might say, oh, you come after the weakest link. I don't know. I think you attack the strong point, because through woman, all the rest of the world will be established.
Yep.
Yep. You could have, 5 men and 1 woman, and hey, you got 5 women and 1 man, you got a good chance of populating the world, So I think that Christianity and our faith, they're coming for that. And they're coming for it in many insidious ways that we're not necessarily I think of, again, the attack on women. I think the racial tensions, because what it does is it then brings division into the church.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's race in your church.
Yeah.
Right? And so if there are racial divisions outside and you come in, it's a way to divide. I mean, the church has been patriarchal and, for the longest time, their kind of thoughts on how they treat women that's kind of been there. But if they could drive a further wedge, they're going to bring race into the church. And then when they start making it a place where not even your children are safe at school or in public places, they're coming for us.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be wise as serpents about that.
Yeah. And
understand that we cannot turn a blind eye to the racial tension that are happening in our community. Yeah. But I think, again, that's been our biggest struggle, right? Even as an organization, trying to get, in particular, Black churches to understand and not align themselves with wokeism, because it almost feels like that for them, that might be a place they think they can find some unity finally, right? I can finally get some people outside of my church to agree with me. We can have some common ground, on what racism is. But I think that's a deception.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deception. Okay. Where were we? In the same vein, wokesters' willfully embrace of Marx's abusive political philosophies are obvious, as they, such as BLM, proudly declare their Marxist allegiance despite knowing his philosophies, socialism, Marxism, communism, have failed wherever implemented. The effects of manipulation cause wokesters to willfully disregard horrible atrocities and millions of lost lives due to Marx's communism. They also pretend complete ignorance about the fact that Marx himself was a racist and sexist pig. Wokesters rely on the emotional momentum that carries the movement while wholly ignoring their personal ideological blindness. The wokeism phenomenon conclusively proves ideological blindness exists and maniacal manipulation persists. Any thoughts, guys? Anything you want to say?
Well, considering that if you go back and listen to, for those that are just coming on, didn't really hear what we covered about Marx, facts that he was a sexist, misogynist, sex slaving pig. He was horrible. He was really a horrible human being. And then you have people like Ibram X. Kendi and BLM and all the founders of BLM. And you have Ramin D'Angelo and all of these others, these progressive leftists, AOC and Corey Bush and all these people that would gleefully, what's his name? Our socialist, who's really a commie. What's his name? Senator, the old guy, he runs every time. Anyway. And if you take all of these characters and recognize that they're raising their hand and gleefully, proudly saying, "I'm a Marxist," it's crazy. It's not like they didn't have the capacity to understand who Karl Marx was, what his fundamental tenets are, and how those are being carried out today. These are intelligent people. But they're more tied to ideology. They're more tied to, even if it's illogical for them, they just completely ignore the inconvenient truths about Marx or about Marxism or about any of that. And they're more tied to just the ideology of changing everything, right? So, that gives you that tells the story right there, is that the manipulators have done such a masterful job that tying people emotionally to an ideology that, even in the face of logic, prudence, wisdom, historical facts about who those figures were and what the outcomes have been, doesn't matter. They're still tied to they still have a soul tie, if you will, to the ideology. So
That's good. We're about to get into Saul Alinsky and his 13 rules, which I don't want to read now because we're at the end of our hour, but will definitely be our topic for next week. Is looking at the radical rules, the 13 rules for radicals by Saul Alinsky. That is very much a strategy for a lot of, not just in politics, but also in your community organizations.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I was doing a lot of community work, even though I was a Republican and conservative and a Christian, the community organizations that I worked in, that I partnered with, that were looking after the welfare of the community, Black community, were very steeped in the 13 rules for radicals.
Yep.
Like that was a Bible to them. That
Yep.
was how they strategized.
Yep.
That's how they strategized against the politicians.
Yep.
Right. And so it's like you have what you believe to be the defenders of the weak and the poor, the community organizations, fighting against, government and, politicians, using the rules for radicals to disrupt.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, yeah, we need to make them wake up. We need to make them see. But I'm not sure that, taking gasoline to a fire, only because you can make it bigger, or you have, you can influence the outcome, is the way that you want to proceed.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting next week when we look at the rules for radicals, because that is master manipulation.
Yep.
Using chaos to break down order so that you can then take over.
Yep.
That's not funny.
Yep.
And these are community organizations who believe that they're doing their best to fight for the poor.
Yep.
To fight for, single parents, to fight for, poor education. And it's kind of like, well, if the believers in the Creator would just stand up, I think truth could do a much better job.
That's it. Yep.
I think grace, love, and mercy could do a much better job. It does not mean we have to be wimps.
Yep.
There is nothing you read about our Creator in the Old Testament that would make you think that he is a pushover. Right.
Yep.
There's nothing about him. There's nothing about the 10 Commandments that would make you think, oh, if you believe that, you're weak.
Right.
Not at all.
Not at all.
But somehow we have taken on rules for radicals.
Yep.
As a way that a community organization should save the people. So
yep.
That's interesting. Lonnie, Kevin, any last thoughts before we go?
I just love to hear from anybody from the audience. If you got anything, come on up, talk to us, tell us what you're getting or not getting, or give us some questions, whatever. Before we go, I'd love to just hear what any input.
Lonnie?
No, I have nothing to add, but I would be interested as well for anyone from the audience, anything that they've noticed or comments they would like to make.
Pastor Leslie takes the easy way. I can see her laughing now. She says, I enjoy the conversation, she typed in the chat. And I know that Major Daughter is asleep now because it's that time over in South Africa.
Okay.
But anyone else who's on our YouTube or Facebook feeds, we thank you. Anyone who's listening to the replays, please join us next week. We're going to have an interesting discussion. If you've never heard of Saul Alinsky, Alinsky, just look up Rules for Radicals. He was a major influence on President Barack Obama. He is a major influence in the Democratic Party, and your local community organizations.
Yep.
Many of them who are acting as intermediaries for the weak and the poor and the sick, use that as their strategy.
Yep.
So, be interesting talk next week, for sure. Okay. If there's nothing else, we're going to close down this room. So we thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. This room will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.